Good evening. On behalf of the Student Academy of Doctors of Audiology, I would like to welcome you to today's Student Practice Management webinar, Interviewing for Professional Positions in an Audiology Practice. My name is Stephanie Chayeski, and I'm pleased to serve as today's course coordinator. I have just a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. If you have any technical challenges during the session, please use the chat feature to make me aware, and I will be glad to assist you. Please type your questions into the question queue or the chat box, and they will be answered and addressed by presenters at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded and will be available for online viewing in the next week to 10 days. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce the course moderator for this session, Kate Witham, SATA Board President and third-year AUD student at Gallaudet University. Kate?
Hi, thank you, Stephanie. On behalf of the SATA board, I am excited for the opportunity to welcome AUD students from programs across the country to this session on professional interviewing. It is also my distinct pleasure to introduce today's course leaders, Dr. Alicia Spoor, Dr. Audra Branham, and Dr. Rachel Megan Favier. I already forgot, Favier, sorry. Dr. Branham graduated with her AUD from the Northeast Ohio AUD Consortium and joined a private practice in Youngstown, Ohio in 2010. There, she worked with the practice's founder, Dr. Eric Hagberg, until she took ownership in 2014. She works with patients of all ages and her primary focus in hearing care. Dr. Branham currently serves on ADA's board of directors and is a member of the Education Committee. She is also a preceptor and mentor for students at her private practice. Dr. Megan Favier graduated with her AUD from Northern Illinois University. She completed her fourth-year externship at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and joined a nonprofit clinic in OKC in 2014, where she serves as the adult clinic director. Dr. Megan Favier currently serves on ADA's board of directors as treasurer and the Audiology Projects board of directors. She is also a preceptor and mentor for students at her clinic. Dr. Alicia Spoor graduated from Gallaudet University in 2006 with her AUD degree. She completed her fourth-year externship at Mayo Clinic, Arizona, and was hired as part of the hearing aid and cochlear implant teams. Upon relocating to the East Coast, she worked with two private practices prior to opening Designer Audiology. Dr. Spoor is a past president of ADA and serves on multiple committees. She is the current legislative chair for the Maryland Academy of Audiology. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Spoor.
Thank you, Ms. Witham. If you don't mind, we're going to have you advance the slides for us, so I appreciate your ongoing help throughout this. And on behalf of Dr. Branham, Dr. McGann Favier, and myself, I want to say thank you for thinking of us and allowing us the opportunity to present to you. Next slide, please. We're going to spend the first part of our time together going over job searches and networking, cover letters, resumes, and curriculum vitas, and finally, interviewing and negotiating skills. We will do our best to make this formal presentation as quick as possible so that you can ask as many questions of the two or three of us as possible. Please remember, as Ms. Chayeski said, to type your questions in as we go, and we'll allow enough time to answer them at the end. We'll also make sure that you have all of our contact information, so you're welcome to reach out to us at a later date and time. When you're searching for your fourth year or for your first job or maybe a subsequent job, you're definitely going to want to start with the location. Some things to think about is their geographical area that you want to be located. Do you want to be close to home, close to a partner, a specific climate area, or do you want to go someplace that you've never experienced before? These are all going to help just make you make the decision for where you're going to start that entire process. And I would tell, as some of my students have heard, if you're listening, When it comes to your fourth year, or I understand your third year if you're an accelerated student, when it comes to your fourth year, dream big. You can do anything you want for an entire year, and there are no strings attached to it. So literally the entire world is at your disposal, or is at your disposal. So don't be afraid to take that giant leap. And as you're likely going to hear multiple times tonight, the profession of audiology is very small. So using your national organizations, conferences that you might attend, manufacturer representatives, and educational institutions are all going to be good resources for who has open positions and where you may be able to apply, both as a fourth year and for job opportunities. Additionally, with the 21st century, most of us are online in different Facebook pages, both for career positions, professionals, and as students. And so those Facebook pages can be extremely helpful for networking and finding locations. And there are websites that are helpful, including those like Audiology Online. So next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McGann Favor.
All right, so let's talk about what you need to do before you even think about your interview. So you need to determine what's a good practice for you and what's not a so good practice for you. You might think about your clinical experiences in grad school, what you felt was important for you in that professional position, maybe what was unacceptable, and look for companies who align with those goals. You can glean a lot about a practice by looking at its website and online reviews, but keep in mind networking is also a valuable way to find out details about the culture of a practice. So if you can find someone who lives in the area and knows the clinic's reputation, or maybe someone who currently or in the past has worked at the practice is helpful as well. When you're researching the company online and the interviewer, be sure to mimic language that you see on their website during your interview. So some examples could be what the clinic's mission is, maybe something interesting you read, knowing what services they provide, and bring up those topics when you talk with them. That way the employer knows you did your research and are truly vested in working with them. Prepare questions based on knowledge you've gained from your research of the practice and the interviewer, so that you can show the interviewer that you're interested beyond what you've been able to see online. So for example, you might see that the company is really active in the community from their website or their Facebook page. So you might ask, what expectations do they have of you when it comes to that area? So will they expect you to attend health fairs during or after work hours, give presentations in the community, maybe reach out to physicians? So just some things you can think outside the box just by looking online. And keep in mind as well when you're talking, how you're talking to them, because the reason I say this is everyone has different preferences, every interviewer and what they're looking for in a new hire. So the more you can get to know the person that'll be interviewing you, the better your chances are. And so I always like to use an example that I'm from Oklahoma, and I've practiced in 2 other states, but I'm back in Oklahoma now. And we have here what's called the Oklahoma Standard, which is your basic kind of Southern hospitality where everyone's kind of overly nice and accommodating. So an interviewee here might be cautious of coming off overly confident, because especially if you don't have facts or experience to back up how you're acting in an interview. And so someone here, it would be, you may get further with a more subtle approach in getting what you want rather than just blatantly asking for something. So certainly this can vary regionally and also depending on who's interviewing you. But again, the more you can know about the practice and their culture, the better you're going to be able to fit in to that mold as well. And one thing to keep in mind as well is it is okay to ask questions that don't fit the job description, but if they're large ones, do them before the interview through email, just so you don't waste your time and theirs. So for example, and interview I had once, the job posting was for a full-time position. And after interviewing a candidate and going through all the, reading through all of her application materials and talking to her, and at the end of the hour-long interview, she said, "Well, I'm really only interested in part-time. Are you okay with that?" And no, I wasn't. It was a full-time position. So that's something that if you have something that is a deal breaker for you, you might bring it up at the beginning before you invest further time in that practice. Next slide, please. So next, we'll cover resumes and cover letters and some different things to include or maybe not include in those. So I'm not going to read through the slide. Like Stephanie said earlier, these will be available for you afterwards for your reference. But just keep in mind that a resume is what convinces a potential employer that you have credible and meaningful experience. So with that, you really want to focus on the professional skills you've learned, interesting experiences the employer may find useful, and any leadership roles you've had. In writing a resume, keep it short, 1 to 2 pages only. Don't make it longer than that. Looking at the way you're wording things, use action verbs that show your uniqueness and be as specific as possible with certain tasks or achievements you've made. And keep in mind, every square inch of your resume is important, including the white space. So use it wisely. And once you've created your resume, I always call it a draft resume, be sure you tailor it for the position you're applying for. One resume is not good for 5 different positions. So again, looking at some of the language that maybe was used on a website about their mission or values, you can place some of that same language in your resume, because if it mattered to the employer to put it in their public facing language on their website, they're going to like it if they see it on your resume. So last but not least, certainly proofread it many, many times and have others look over it too, because they may see things that you don't. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of different places you can look for resume reviews. And I just wanted to quickly provide kind of a short example of what I meant earlier by kind of using action words and quantifying your work. So here's an example what you might see on a resume when applying for your first job when you're in your externship currently. So you'll notice what's written on the left has a more kind of generic information about what you did during your externship year. However, on the right, you'll see a more descriptive way of telling your externship story. So for example, that first bullet point, the use of selected for makes your externship position sound more prestigious than worked for, and that there were other candidates, but you were the one that was chosen. Showing exactly how many hours you've spent with specific patient types or appointment types gives the employer an idea of how much experience you have in various areas. And certainly you want to highlight any accomplishments you may have had that benefited your current employer, externship, or during a job. Dr. Spoor, did you have anything to add with that?
Certainly. So I think one of the things when I look at different resumes and curriculum vitas, which we'll talk about in the next slide, the more details you can provide, the better. Like Dr. McGann Favor was saying, the hours are great, but a lot of times I also want to know when I look at things, what type of equipment do you use? What manufacturers are familiar with? What systems were being done? Were you using screening methods or were you using diagnostics protocols? So all of those details you can get into very fine-tuned information. And sometimes those acronyms, because we're familiar with them in audiology, but they can be very helpful later on in your life and in your CV as well. So if we go to the next slide, I mentioned, obviously, as a private practice owner, I'm always looking at the curriculum vitae. And so there's a big difference between a curriculum vitae and a resume. And so one of the reasons why I like a curriculum vitae is because I can see exactly what the the candidate has done and kind of weed out my first round before they get to a phone interview or a Skype interview or in the door. And so your curriculum vitae can be any length. You're not bound by that 1 to 2 pages, and really it should be longer than 1 to 2 pages if you have the information and the detail. So this allows you to put in there, you know, I worked with Widex hearing aids. I'm familiar with advanced bionics. We use the odometric system for VNG. So put all of that information in there. And especially when you're an early career professional, I think it's really important to include things like special skills. So as Ms. Witham read off, I'm a graduate of Gallaudet. One of my special skills is American Sign Language, and I have a proficiency rating, and that would go under special skills. If you've taken like Dr. Chaikin or Dr. Hugart's the Room and Management course, that could be a special skill as well, because that's along the lines of a workshop. If you have some form of certification training, that would be another area that you could put as a special skill. So that information can be extremely useful in kind of drawing out why you are a stronger candidate than somebody else. Volunteer and outside positions can also be helpful if they show a specific skill. So not necessarily audiologic related. Hopefully you guys know what an audiologic related skill would be, but I'm thinking somewhere along the lines of when I see people that come in that are marathon runners or they're Ironman. I did my 4th year at Mayo Clinic, Arizona, and we had a lot of Ironman and Iron women who would come in as different candidates. And that really just showed that they could have a long-term goal. So I knew that they would able to stick with something. They were dedicated. They would have short-term tracking goals, and that those kind of special skills were displayed through the course that they were running different marathons or those Ironmans. So the CVs are a little bit easier, I think, in my mind, because you don't necessarily have to tailor them to each position, because it is going to be all-encompassing. Your poster presentations, your research information, your dissertation or capstone project, your special skills, your languages spoken, your volunteer work, all of those, and there's not that restraint on the resume length. But I know Dr. McGann Favor, as she just mentioned, is interested in resumes, so I'm going to let her speak to a little bit about what she looks for and why she prefers that version.
Yeah, so I think the take-home message that I'd like everyone to take home is it's really important to follow whatever the job application directions are, because not everyone wants a CV. Personally, I'm on the other end. I don't have time or want to spend time looking at 5, 6+ pages of your CV. Now, if you have lots of research experience, then great, I want to see that. But a resume is plenty for me. I just want a snapshot to see who you are and if we should continue the discussion further into an interview. So when I was a graduate student, I had an audiologist tell me once that in his hiring process, in the application, the instructions said to turn in your resume in a Word file format. And he did that because most people will email out a PDF version of it. But he wanted to see who was paying attention to the instructions and the little details. And he wrote off everyone that sent him a resume on a PDF, in a PDF format. So really important, look at what the interviewer is asking for. And if they don't state it, then ask, would you like a cover letter? Would you like my CV? Would you like my transcripts? It's always okay to ask what they might prefer. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a real resume that I've received during an interview. And I just want to point out some things to notice. So first, you'll see the swirly font and the color bar at the top. That's just not professional for an audiologist's application. The position that this person was applying for was a hearing aid BAHA tinnitus practice for adult patients. And this audiologist that applied if you notice in the expertise and interest columns, most of them are geared around pediatric issues and cochlear implants, which was specifically not in the job description. This person's profile also discusses how she really enjoys connecting with children and their families, how she's proficient in ASL, how she's created funding opportunities for pediatric initiatives. Again, nothing that applied for the position that was posted. So when I saw this resume, it really let me know that, one, this person did not tailor the resume for me, and honestly just made me wonder if they even wanted or would be good at the position I was offering. And as a side note, the second page of this resume had listed Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a personal interest. And like Dr. Spohr mentioned, when you have a hobby or interest that has a goal set that's applicable to what you're applying for, I think it's great to list that. However, this particular, and I didn't mind that it was on her resume, but this applicant during our phone interview brought up her jiu-jitsu experience unasked by me, and said that she had been the last few years really engaged in jiu-jitsu because her current job was very stressful, and she found it to be a great stress reliever after work to go home or to go to the gym and hit things. And I mean, I know we're all human and that jobs can be stressful and exercise can be stress relieving. However, it's not the best first impression. So just a little note that if you are going to list your kind of special talents, you might not expand upon them unless asked. Next slide, please.
So when it comes to cover letters, the cover letter, as this title tells you, it's your opportunity to tell your story. And this is where you can get a little more into who you are as a person, as opposed to just kind of the formed resume and the formed curriculum vitae. But you really should only use cover letters when there's no objective on the resume or CV and when you're specifically asked for it. So in a practice site like myself, I don't necessarily want to read through a cover letter unless I'm asking for it on that position. So to reiterate what Dr. McGann-Favor said, pay attention to what is being asked of you. But when you do use a cover letter, you want to make sure you have identifying information on it. There were multiple times when we were looking for fourth-year applicants in Arizona, and the cover letter would come on with absolutely no identifying information. So unless we were extremely careful to keep all of the information together for one candidate, if those pages got separated, we had no idea where that cover letter went or who it belonged to. So if you're going to use some type of header or footer on your resume or CV, I would strongly recommend that you also use that same type of header and or footer on your cover letter so that if they get separated, they go back together. You also want to make sure, like Dr. McGann-Favor said, that you're really tailoring your cover letter to the position, and this is your time to highlight things from your resume or CV or comment on things that you couldn't include. So going back to the example resume that Dr. McGann-Favor just showed, if you were applying for a pediatric position and you had pediatric experience, beyond just listing it in the experience column as that audiologist did, you should be calling that out in your cover letter and kind of reinforcing that drive in that population and why you've worked with them and what your passion is. And that's going to help pull you apart as well. And I am married to a person who has very strong writing skills, and he always says one of the best ways to set yourself apart is to be a strong writer. So resumes and CVs are great, but when you come across with a really strong cover letter, you're setting yourself apart from the competition as well. And there are lots of people that can help with that, including some of your national organizations that have that ability. And if you're currently a student, hopefully your externship placement coordinator is also helping with that, or maybe you're getting that in one of your professional issues or private practice business classes. And then finally, your cover letter really should be limited to 1 page. We don't want to be going through 4 and 5 page cover letters. We're not looking for a thesis. We are just looking for some of those things that you want to highlight and pull out. And it really truly is a letter. So when you are done, sign it. And if that means that you need to print it out, sign it, and scan it back in because you're submitting everything electronically, take the time to do that. It looks professional, it looks nicer, and it actually looks like a letter, which I think is a nice personal touch, again, when you're applying to a position. And if somebody's getting 20 to 100 to 1,000 candidates, you want to make sure that you're standing out. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to start with a story from Dr. Branham, one of her first interview experiences as an extern looking for a position. And what she said was, you really don't want to plan anything around your interview in case it goes longer than expected. So when she was, her initial interview at the practice that she ended up owning was scheduled at noon and was told to just plan for an hour at most. However, when 1 o'clock came and the first patient arrived, the practice owner asked if she'd like to shadow him while he saw a few patients. And so, of course, she immediately wanted to do that. It was her opportunity to ask him questions about how he did things in the moments, things she might not have thought to ask him until that moment occurred. And she found that it was really important for her to see how the owner worked with his patients, what his demeanor was, his professionalism, what were his processes, to really ensure it was a good fit for her. And so she ended up staying until 5 p.m. and shadowed him the rest of the day as he saw patients. And she felt that that experience really helped to solidify it was the right fit for her. And I will echo that too, that because someone says an interview may last X amount of time, if it's the place you want to be, clear your schedule for it. Certainly, you'll also want to accommodate the interviewer's schedule, not yours. Be very flexible. If you need to take PTO, do so. Give yourself an hour away. If the interviewer suggests something that you don't like, hey, let's meet at Starbucks for the interview, but you don't like coffee, don't tell them you don't like coffee. Just say, no problem, I'll see you there. It's also really important to come prepared for the interview, and we'll touch on this a few times, but you really want to have questions reserved for the end. When you don't have any questions for the interviewer, the potential employer, it just appears you don't care. And so some questions that might be useful for you could be, what are you hoping for in a new team member? What's the best outcome for you and your team? Or what's a typical day like? Whatever you think you might need as far as your transcripts, copies of all your application papers, business cards, be sure to bring extras of all of those. Bring much more than you think you'll actually need. And another key note is make sure your phone is on mute and not vibrate. Vibrate is just as distracting as a ringtone. And I will turn it over to Dr. Spohr.
Thank you. So I think one of the things that is overlooked, and I really want to make it aware because this makes a first impression to everybody, is how you are dressed. And so I know when we talk about this in class, as a third or a fourth year student, we realize that you're probably not spending $1,000 on your professional wardrobe, but we do expect that you have some nice clothes and you can put your best foot forward. And obviously that initial appearance is going to have a lasting impression. And so you always want to dress better than what is expected. So even if you're going to go into a pediatric clinic and you think, well, I'm going to be on the floor and I'm going to be testing peds and they're going to throw up on me, because they are, don't be afraid. They will kick and spit and throw up, and sometimes adults do that too. But you want to be wearing something better than what maybe you might necessarily wear every day to clinic. So don't be afraid to pull out those business suits. Don't be afraid to pull out, skirts, dresses, whatever it might be. When in doubt, you also need to be conservative. And what we mean by that is women, you should be wearing closed-toed shoes. Nobody wants to see your pedicure nail color, no matter how pretty it is. You need to be wearing nylons or dress socks. If you walk into a practice, for example, my practice, and I am very big on infection control, thank you to Dr. Bankitis, and you're not wearing nylons, I don't care if it's an interview for a front desk position or a student rotation or a permanent job and you're female, that right there has written you off my list. That's very important to me as an owner. It's very important to you as a professional. You want to protect yourself from patients, and it's important to patients so that you're not infecting them. When you're looking at the lengths of your skirts or dresses, you do want to make sure that they are conservative. We all remember back in the days where you had to hold, or maybe just me in Catholic school, you had to hold your hand down by your side and your skirt had to come below your fingertips. Or I remember in the clinic, we had the 3Bs and they were breast, belly, and butt. And so if you moved or sat or stood up, you weren't able to see any of those 3 body parts at any point in time. And you really want your tops to have sleeves on them. So you never want to be in a situation where everybody is slightly more conservative and you have on a sleeveless top, no matter how nice it looks. And that being said, you can easily put a cardigan or a jacket on. And then when it comes to your hair, your makeup, your jewelry, all of that needs to be professional. And if you're not sure what that means, ask one of your clinic supervisors, ask your mother, ask your grandmother, because they will certainly tell you. Gentlemen, you need to be wearing closed-toed shoes as well, and you might think that's funny, but especially in some of those more laid-back positions where Birkenstocks might be in and sandals might be okay, or you're in an 80-degree weather year-round climate, it's not okay to be wearing in the clinic situation. Same type of things, your socks, your pants should be good. You want a button-down shirt on, if whether that's short sleeve or long sleeve, because again, you can always put a jacket over it. And then you should be looking at a vest, a tie, a bow tie, a belt, and those should be coordinating as well. So pick the one that is kind of tailored to your personality, but again, make sure that it is appropriate. And as you know, your hair and your makeup and your jewelry should also be professional. So when in doubt, if you're not sure, ask if my grandmother would approve of it, because she's 94 and you may be working with some of those patients and you don't want to turn them off just because you want to show your fashion and you're wearing a asymmetric off the shoulder shirt or something along those lines. That being said, we all know it's the 21st century, and so most of you know what questions can be asked in an interview. But on the flip side, what questions should not be asked in an interview? And these are very concrete answers. And if you're not sure, you can always Google them. But Dr. Gail Whitelaw at Ohio State has a really great list that I've incorporated. And so the things that you should not be asked about when you're doing an interview are race, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation or identity, disabilities, marital status, family, or starting a family. And more importantly is you need to think about what's going to happen when some of these topics come up during your interview. You can go through and have kind of blanket statements of, I'm not sure I feel comfortable answering that, or, I might have had to put that down on my tax forms and I'd be happy to discuss that later on when I accept a position and that becomes pertinent, or, I'm pretty sure that that's not something we need to go through right now because of whatever that issue might be. But you do need to have a blanket statement and response for that. That being said, you never other things you don't want to talk about, you never want to talk badly about a previous clinical experience. I mentioned audiology is a very small profession and we're all talking to each other all the time. If something comes up and you're asked about something that might have been negative for you, or the question is, what type of negative experience did you have? You need to put a positive spin on it. and say, you know what, there was this one place and it was really fast paced, and that's not the types of environment that I'm interested in, but that really helped me learn how to time manage or get through an audiogram without the luxury of having 45 minutes, or that solidified my area that I am really truly passionate about is whatever. Other topics that may not be inappropriate but might make you feel uncomfortable. And again, you should really have answers ready for these. Some of those topics might include over-the-counter hearing aids, third-party administrators, pricing models within the audiology profession, working with audiologist assistants and or hearing aid dispensers, and more. So again, you need to have answers to these, and you need to know what those practice preferences are. And this is where your homework that Dr. McGann-Faber talked about are going to be so beneficial. If you see on their website that they do have a full range of support staff, from a billing coordinator to an audiologist assistant, to a dispensing provider, to an audiologist, you need to make sure you don't come in and put your foot in your mouth about how you are a doctor of audiology and you will be doing every little thing, including a tubing change, because that's obviously not going to make you a team player. And one thing that I found is helpful is that if you're not sure how you're going to answer some of these things, write down a paragraph in your free time. It doesn't have to be long. Read that out loud, and then read it out loud in a mirror, and then read it to a colleague. So you can start to formulate what sounds good, what comes off as a little harsh, and how to tailor your responses to that. And then use any constructive criticism. So sometimes just talking to another colleague can give you little tips and tricks and ways to answer things that you may not have thought of. And then you're going to have one or more interviews, and there are multiple types of interviews. So don't be afraid and don't be turned off. Some of them are informal. Group interviews can sometimes allow that interviewing practice to see how well you interact with other people that are part of a team, that may be a supervisor, that may be equal to you, how well you're going to react with medical staff, referring physicians, and you might even get a test or written case study to go through. It's not necessarily to give you an A, B, C, or D at this point in your life, but it might be a founding thing that that practice really wants to know. I found there's one practice in the state of Maryland where I currently am, and she gives everybody a hearing aid matrix to figure out. And a lot of you might be saying, I have no idea what a hearing aid matrix is, which I would highly recommend you go look up in your hearing aid book by Harvey Dillon again. But that's something really important to her practice that she thinks all of her providers need to know, so that they know what's appropriate when they're fitting their patients. And what I have found really interesting is a personality test, because I know what my personality is and who best works in those types of situations with me. And so knowing what your personality is, or if you're asked to take a personality test, don't be put off with that. They just want to make sure that you are going to feel comfortable in the practice, and vice versa. And if you don't like it, they probably won't like it either. So don't be offended if you get some different types of personalities in there. You want everybody to be as best as they can and to make it worthwhile for you long time. Next slide, please.
So the next 2 or 3 slides are going to talk about kind of during the interview and following the interview, what are some things that are appropriate to do or ask during them, and what is not appropriate. So first off, I know we've said this over and over, but come prepared, not only with what you learned about the practice, the owner, the staff members, but also know your personal elevator pitch. Like Dr. Spohr mentioned just a moment ago, practice it out loud, say it in front of the mirror, say it to someone else. You should know why you're the best person for that position. So be prepared to answer that and say that. Also, know what's on your resume. Nothing looks worse than if an interviewer brings up something that's on your resume and you kind of blank because you don't know what they're talking about. It has happened. So that tells me, again, this person has not prepared for this interview, nor was this resume prepared for me. Certainly arrive early. I'm one of the latest people out there, but not for an interview. You've got to be on time. Be early, do not be late. And remember, maintain those good communication skills like you tell your patients to do. Give the interviewer your undivided attention. Look them in the eye. Be positive. Like Dr. Spohr said, even if you've had a bad externship experience, tell them about the good parts. And something that's asked pretty frequently during an interview, but I would caution you to wait or hold off on this, is asking about salary and benefits of the position. The interview isn't the time to do that. Once you're offered the position is the time to do that. So if you have questions about work hours and satellite clinics and salary and PTO, all of that stuff, that's something you really want to ask after the position's been offered. Next slide. So some other things during the interview, especially if you're an extern going into your first job or you're a student going into your extern, it's okay to take a pause when you're answering a question or repeat it to ensure you understand what the interviewer is asking. I would much rather have someone ask me, can I have a minute to think on that and give an honest and thought out response than for them to start rambling. So interviewers know that the interviewee is going to be nervous or likely is, and maybe at this point in their career not have as much experience with it. So go easy on yourself. Just be as kind of honest and true to yourself as you can, because that's going to come off more human to the potential employer. Next slide, please. And lastly, when you're following up from an interview, certainly be sure to thank them for their time, whether the interview is in person, over a video conference, or on the phone. And one thing to keep in mind, even bad interviews are good practice. I once, early on, when I hadn't interviewed very many people, I got a really poor application on paper. And I wanted to interview this applicant, and this was an audiologist, not a student. I wanted to interview her because I wanted to see, would I be able to tell a bad applicant in the interview as well, or am I judging her paper application, rightly so? And the interview went terribly, and for many reasons. It would be pretty obvious to everyone listening in, from lots of interruptions on her side of the video conference, to her looking like she was wearing pajamas, and her hair kind of a mess, and just didn't look put together. This was also the one that at the end of the interview asked if she could do part-time and have very specific hours on certain days, as part of what she was looking for. So from whether you're being interviewed or whether you're doing the interviewing, those bad ones can be good practice too. One thing also to keep in mind as far as follow-up is concerned, it is a good idea to ask the employer when you can expect to hear from them. And if that time has passed, maybe a couple days has passed since, let's say they said, we'll get in touch with you in a week, and now it's been a week and a half, it is okay to contact them and ask, did you miss some sort of communication? But one thing I might suggest is turn it around on you. Maybe say something like, I've been really busy working on a project at my current placement and just wanted to make sure I didn't miss an email from you. That way it's a more gentle reminder, to get an answer from them. Next slide, please. And lastly, with salary and benefits, again, this is going to be something that's specific to each practice, but know your worth. Ensure you're getting what you're worth, but don't be overly confident either, especially if this is your first job. like I said earlier, be honest and real. If this is your first negotiation or you're nervous, just say so. You being yourself is going to sound more sincere, less arrogant, but also have the reasons why you're asking for what you're asking. I've had externs, when we've practiced interviews, will ask for a salary bump or more PTO days very kind of rigidly at the end. And it's pretty obvious that someone instructed them to ask for more than whatever was offered in some fashion. And so if you are going to ask for something like that, be sure you have a reason for yourself, but that you also really need it. I wouldn't advise just asking for more just to do so. If this isn't your first job, though, detail how you improve services and operations at your previous employment. When it comes to benefits, they are tend to likely be something that can be negotiated more so than salary. So paid time off, CE reimbursements, 401k contributions, health insurance, equity buy-in opportunities, all of those things might be something that you could bring up initially. One thing that's important too is you really need to make sure you have the equipment you need to do your job well. So for example, if you go into a clinic and see that they're missing something, let's say a reeler machine, or maybe they just don't have enough for each audiologist to use one, negotiate for it and provide the reason why they should want you to have it. And lastly, if you do turn down a position, again, thank the interviewer, their team or staff, if they were a part of that, for all the time they've put into this process. It takes a lot of time to review all the applications, meet with people, talk with them over the phone. Certainly, if you do have multiple kind of stages of the interview and in the end you turn it down, maybe a small gift is warranted as well. Again, audiology is a small community, so if you're going to decline something, just do it in a professional manner. Next slide, please.
So, as Dr. McGann Favor was speaking, obviously you want to do your homework, but I think one of the hardest things, especially when you are a new employer, all you students who've graduated and will become doctors of audiology, how do you go about finding a starting salary? We all know we would love to make significantly more than we likely will, but you need to put everything in perspective. And so here's my tip to you when it comes to knowing what you're worth. And this is nice because it is a data point for you as well. So I would go to the government services scale, and you can just Google government service, or in short, GS, government service, and you want to search an annual salary for a clinical doctorate. A clinical doctorate in the GS scale is somewhere between a GS 9 and a GS 11. And then they will give you a range for that salary base. Once you have that salary base, it's typically based on a DC area cost of living because of the government service, the Washington, DC area. Then you're going to use a cost of living calculator to put that into perspective for where you will be locating. And then that will give you a nice little range for what the average salary is for a clinical doctorate that's starting out within the profession. So, for example, when I was working in Arizona, I had my starting range, and one of our fourth years was fortunate enough to be offered a position and accepted in Texas. And she was really concerned that their salary that they had offered her with the position was very low. And so we went on to the GS scale. We figured out what it would be in Washington, D.C. We converted it into a cost of living for where she would be living in Texas, and she was making more money as a first-year student than I was as an experienced professional. So she was getting a lot more, even though the money didn't look quite as big in terms of the dollars. Because of the cost of living, she was making a killing. So that's a nice kind of touch point that you can use to figure out where to go for your salary. When it comes to negotiating, I think one of the hardest things, because as a practice owner and Dr. McGann Favor as a clinic director and a department head who's hiring, if it's possible, you never want to throw out the first number when it comes to salary. But you should expect to have that touch point, which is why I mentioned the GS scale. But when you're coming into the first position, it might be harder to negotiate the salary, which is why Dr. McGann Favor just talked about some of those benefit packages. In my world, PTO is worth significantly more than money because time with family and friends is a priority for me. So what you need to know what you need to make, you need to know what you need to live, and if you're not sure of that, stay tuned in future webinars when we talk about your hourly rates and figuring out some of those things. And then, you know, what are you willing to compromise on when it comes to that? And I find, you know, not to be afraid to negotiate. I have a fabulous front desk coordinator, front office coordinator right now. And when she negotiated with me, she came back in writing and said, you know, thank you so much for your offer. I would like to humbly request that I be paid X amount of dollars per hour as opposed to what I had initially offered her. So there are very nice, easy ways that you can negotiate that, both by saying it and by speaking it, or saying it and writing it. And those are easy to figure out as well. Dr. McGann Favor, I know you have some other great ideas that you would like to speak about as well.
Yeah, so one thing that I think is important is, you know, kind of developing your, what they call your BATNA, which is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So like Dr. Spohr said, you can go into a negotiation knowing the things that you need. When I first started out, I looked at what are my costs to live, like what are my needs, and then what are my likes, what are some activities or amenities or whatnot I'd like to add to my life that would make it better, and what would that cost be to me, and then kind of the third version of here's my best case scenario where I get to do all these things. I get to travel or buy my $1,000 wardrobe, and have those numbers available to you before you go in to negotiate. But when you do that, you know what you're willing to accept and not accept. And so be okay with walking away if you need to. And I find that this is something that you can role play with a friend or family member because it just comes out more smoothly that way. So when you know what you need to make and the offers below that, you can confidently walk away and explore another option. Next slide, please. And lastly, just wanted to touch on an annual review because as a new professional, like Dr. Spohr said, you may not have a lot of room to negotiate, but come year one and following years, you have lots to work with. So first and foremost, overperform, track how you're benefiting your company. Then at the end of that year or whatever time period, you can ask for a raise or a PTO because you've earned it and can justify it. And along the way, share any accomplishments you make with your supervisor. This one did not become apparent to me until I became a supervisor. Do not assume that your supervisor knows what you're doing. They're very busy. They're concentrated on their own tasks. They're not paying attention to maybe some of the small things that you do that have a great impact on a clinic. So it can really be a simple email saying, hey, I visited 10 physicians' offices last week, or, you know, I created a new hearing aid repair form that I feel is gonna, you know, work better in our clinic. And when it comes to that more annual, so I guess that piece is share your accomplishments along the way as you're doing them, but keep track of those written down as well, because if you do this at the end of the year, you're going to forget things. that you have done, whether small or large. But at your annual review, come prepared with everything you've accomplished on paper, provide it to your supervisor. You know, how many physicians' offices or community centers did you visit? How many presentations did you give? Did you increase patient numbers or revenue? Were there any protocols you wrote or improved upon? Maybe new employees that you helped train? Concrete things you've done to improve teamwork, morale, culture. And one thing to keep in mind too is not every practice or company holds annual reviews. So if that's not a formal event in whatever practice you're in, make sure it happens. And a review can certainly be formal, but it can be very casual. In my first year, it was as simple as asking my supervisor to sit down and just I asked them, would you mind sitting down? I just wanted to discuss my performance on the team and just make sure I'm meeting what you were expecting me to. And when I sat down with him with 3 pages of this is what I did for the clinic and how, you know, I benefited patients, that is your time to will blow your supervisor out of the water. So keep track of what you're doing and be sure to share it along the way. Next slide, please. So that does bring us to the end of our presentation. I apologize, we went a bit over in time, but we would certainly love to answer any questions anyone in the audience may have.
Thank you, Dr. McGann-Faber, and thank you, Dr. Spohr, for that informative presentation. And thank you to Dr. Branham as well for her contributions. And I know she's still on the line with the little guy. So I actually have a couple of questions, and if anyone on the line has some questions, now would be the time to type those into the question queue. But to get us started, the first question that I have is, beyond academic and professional experience, what types of things are helpful to you in terms of a resume, and what types of things should people avoid? And for example, this person put, is it okay to put faith-based or charitable volunteer activities, or should you stay away from things like that?
So this is Dr. McGann-Faber. That's a great question. Things I would keep off at this point in your career are any sort of awards or accomplishments you got in high school, jobs that you had during college, unless the job has a pertinent value towards what your current position you're applying for. But if you were, you know, winning awards in undergrad, unless it's something that's, you know, really stands out that is unusual, you know, I don't need to know that you had a scholarship in your undergrad. So I would say if you're needing to free up space, keep the more past experience off. That might be better suited for your CV. I do think it's okay to put faith-based accomplishments or volunteer experience, but I think it depends on where you're adding it. So if we're talking about a resume, again, all of that white space is really valuable. So don't take up a lot of space with that piece. Maybe put the few most important ones to you on there. But certainly if you're talking about your CV, then you might put more of that just to show, you know, I really have a robust history of volunteering and it's really what I like to do. So I don't think it's, you should shy away from it, but I guess think about if you were hiring a new person, what would you care to know? And how much are you going to rely on professional experience? And how much information do you need to know about kind of the person as a whole?
Thank you. The next question is, when developing professional references, what should applicants consider? Do you often ask for references with applications? And if so, what do you look for? Are there certain types of references that if they are not included would be a red flag for you?
Sure. So this is Dr. Spohr. That's a great question. And it's funny because Dr. Branham and McGann Favor and I all discussed that before. I would not include references or encourage you not to include references unless you are specifically asked for them. So often at the very bottom of a resume or a CV, you could easily add references available upon request. You could even put that in your cover letter if that is more suited to where it fits in where the white space can or cannot be used for that. But I would make a blanket statement at first. When it actually comes to references, so I realize that some of the students who might be applying to fourth-year positions are going to be asked for references maybe more than people going into job positions. But I tend to look for 3 different references. I like to have one that can speak to the applicant as a clinician, so a clinical supervisor or internship supervisor or externship supervisor. I also like to have a reference that can speak to the applicant related to academics if I'm looking at a student. So somebody who's not necessarily in clinic but can see some of your thought process, or maybe a TA position or something that's audiology related but not necessarily clinic related. And then the third one is whoever can help round that out for you. So if you have a really great supervisor, but you're applying for a pediatric placement, and then you want a second supervisor who did your pediatric rotation, that's who I would include. Going back to the last question with what Dr. McGann Favor said, maybe you have somebody that you work with on the community that is faith-based or volunteer related or something along those lines that can speak to you about a personality, a characteristic, or something like that that's not always displayed or maybe is a little more comfortable for you. That's where I would include the references. So if somebody shows up with just 3 references and they're all from school, I get a little concerned. If they're all from one practice, I get a little concerned. You want variety in what you're doing, which is why your variety on your placements is so important. Your variety in your education is so important. And one of the great things too is that some of you who are listening, who are sitting on the board of your national organizations as students or your state conventions or things like that, those are great people to have write references for you as well. But I would not reach out to them until you're asked. And that's how I would comment on it related to the space.
This is Dr. Branham. I would just like to add to that, if I could, that, even if you've emailed your CV or your resume to the interviewer, make sure you're bringing extra copies to the actual in-person meetings, as well as those references on a separate sheet of paper. You wouldn't want to put available upon request, and then, you're at the interview and they ask for those and you don't have them. So just make sure you show up with them, because I definitely ask for those at the end of interviews when I do feel that they are going well.
Thank you. That's a great point. The next question is it common and appropriate for an interviewer to ask you to demonstrate your knowledge of a piece of equipment or software or a certain clinical protocol, or to do any sort of, role playing as if you were, counseling or doing an intake on a patient?
So this is Dr. McGann Favor. I think every employer is going to feel differently on this one, and that might be something that you encounter more so as a student looking for your externship rather than a professional position or after graduation. I think it's appropriate. I personally don't do that or go to that degree, but I've been in interviews where I've been asked to do that. I think when it comes to the latter part of that question of kind of role playing a situation, a lot of why an interviewer might be doing that I mean, yes, they want to know your answer isn't wildly off base, but they also want to see how you problem solve and work out a situation kind of as it's given to you, rather than something you might be able to prepare beforehand. So in that instance, I think it's really appropriate to say, let me think on that a second, if you need to. You know, but I think you're going to find some people who do that and some that don't.
Excellent. Thank you. The next question in the queue is, how do I shorten my CV to a resume? What things would I be able to include, and what should I take out first?
Sure. So this is Dr. Score again. You definitely, I would say the couple things that you want to highlight on your resume, you definitely want your education. So anything related to your AUD degree, and I would definitely want to see the undergraduate degree as well. So you may not go into a lot of your background on your undergrad. I don't necessarily need to know your 4-point GPA like Dr. McGann Favor said, but you might want to include that for your graduate schooling if you're applying to your 4th year. After that, you know, if you have a 3.8 versus a 3.7, I'm more interested in your experience at that point. Obviously you do want to include your experiences, and I would say that if you have completed your 4th year, or if you are in your 4th year, that is the one that I'm going to look at most often, because that's the one that's furthest along in your career, and I want to see that you're independent and autonomous at that point in time. You may have 1 or 2 internships that you would like to include if you have the space, but I would really whittle those down in terms of highlighting what is unique about those that wasn't in your 4th year position. But again, your main emphasis is going to be in your 4th year. So those are the 2 things that are kind of a must on a resume. And that, for most people, is going to take you to a page and a half. And then after that point, you can kind of decide based on the position you're applying for. As Dr. McGann Favor said earlier, that's when you're going to try to customize it for them. So you might be including volunteer work, you might be including community outreach, you might be including your national board positions. If you're going to be stepping into some place where you are more autonomous, or you're running your own location within a practice, then maybe you want to highlight some of those leadership skills, or working with the medical community, or humanitarian trips that you went on. But again, that's where I feel like you can be a little more personalized. The 4th year position and the AUD degree are really the 2 big things.
Thank you. The next question is, what is an appropriate time to accept or decline a position?
So this is Dr. McGann Favor. That really is up to the employer, and it's something that I would certainly ask during an interview or after an offer has been made. That one, you just want to ask when you can expect to hear from them on an answer regarding your interview. But let's say we're in the 2nd step and you've been offered the position, you can turn that question around on them, and if they don't already say, some will just say, I'd like to hear in a week or 2 weeks, if that's possible. But if they don't, it's okay to ask them what their timeline is. And if you have a timeline that is longer than theirs, you know, that's something that you're going to have to think about, because I know one of the worst parts, especially during your 4th year externship, is the timeline is all over the place on when someone might offer you a 4th year position. I mean, several months apart. And so I would suggest prioritizing your out of the places that you're applying, you know, what are your top choices versus your lower choices. And you're going to have to kind of work with the interviewer's schedule. So if one of your lower choices offers you a position and you still have a month before your top positions interview, you know, one thing I would say is you can ask that position that, hey, I've got an interview in a month. I'd really like to have time to explore that avenue as well, to ensure that I'm really serving a clinic in the best way I can. Would it be okay with you if I got back to you after that? Personally, I don't mind at all within a reasonable time frame, but an externship year, I know you're not starting right away. So if you need a month or 6 weeks, I'm going to be okay with that, within reason. A job beyond your fourth year, I think is going to have a much shorter time frame, and you're just going to have less conflict in that area, because you're going to know, is this a position I want to take or not? You're probably not waiting on a second or third interview for a really long time period anyhow. So I don't think you'll encounter that in your kind of professional interviews later down the road. But I think it, again, that kind of goes with that. Be honest with folks, and if they're going to set a hard deadline, then that's just your professional decision you need to make of, is it something you want to accept or not? One thing, this kind of goes in hand with small community. If you do accept a position and a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks later, turn it down, that word is going to get around in that community. And so, and more than likely that initial employer is not going to be happy with you. So, part of accepting a position that's a professional decision, you need to stick with it unless you're willing to accept the consequences that can come with turning it down, at a later date.
Thank you. That's a great point. We have another one that came into the queue. I believe this one may be for Dr. Spohr. Could you briefly repeat how to tailor the pay calculator, the general pay calculator, to an audiology job for from the military or the government pay scale?
Sure. So I'd be happy to do that. So as mentioned, this is Dr. Spohr. What you need to do, let me pull up my Google, my Chrome Firefox at the moment. And if you type in government services scale, like GS9, you are going to get the 2019, that's the first one that pops up for me, the 2019 federal GS pay scale, government service pay scale, on governmentpay.org. So there are multiple sites that publish this, though, but this one that comes up first is federalpay.org. And when you go to that scale, the GS9 to GS11 is that range that a clinical doctorate is typically going to come into. And you'll see when you log on there, it'll say education requirements. And so when you type in GS9, it says bachelor or master's degree. When you type in GS10, it says master's degree. And when you type in GS11, it doesn't load fast enough for me as we're on the webinar. So you can search that, a little bit of anticipation when you go to that website. And then you're going to see a range for what most of those people are making. Once you have that range, that's typically scaled to the Washington, D.C. cost of living scale. So it's going to be a little bit higher than a lot of the other parts of the country, maybe not all of them, but a little bit higher. And so then what you're going to do is, once you have that range, you're going to open another Google and you're just page, and you're going to look at the cost of living calculator. And so these are just simple places that you can put in your salary on one side, and then it will tell you what a salary should be in another location. So if you currently live in San Francisco, but you want to live in Orlando, Florida, and your current income is $50,000, then it will tell you you need to make approximately $32,000 in order to be on that same type of pay scale. And if any of you have questions, I'm happy to send me an email. I'm happy to walk through it with you, or help you find those websites if you can't find them. But I would just Google it like we do everything else.
Thank you, Dr. Spoor. We have another question that has come into the queue, and I appreciate the speaker's time in staying over a little bit. We have a couple more questions, and they're actually great questions, so I hope we can get through them. This one is, if you're offered a position at the same fourth-year site that you're at for a permanent position, does that interview or negotiation look any different, and in what ways?
This is Dr. McGann Favor. I think that's a great question. And I would say in my experience, it does look different. First and foremost, because if you've been a fourth year at a place, the employer already knows you very well and your skill sets. So you're probably not even going to have an interview. Now you may have that negotiation piece. However, you're going to know your employer as well. So it's going to be a much more relaxed and conversational, I guess, conversation is, I guess, the best way to put it. I also think that when you're a fourth year extern and getting hired on for your first position, typically that's going to be the exact same start pay rate as any other new audiologist. Where negotiations can come in are after you've had some experience and you can show your worth. Now you may be able to do that in your fourth year. So if during your externship, the practice you're in allows you to generate revenue, to see patients on your own at a certain point, to create or modify protocols, any of those things, then that's going to show them your initiative and your value. One thing to be cautious of is if during your fourth year you have some supervision, it's in that time period where it's not, you're not completely left alone with a patient, don't necessarily count that patient as your success. Be careful what you're calling is your patient or your success versus your supervisor's patient or your supervisor's success. But I think in that very first job position, it's just a little harder to negotiate because everyone's relatively starting on even ground.
Thank you. And then the last question that I have for you this evening is, what do each of you look for in your ideal candidate? And I think this is a question for every available panelist.
Sure. So this is Dr. Spoor. I'll start. I will say, in all true honesty, what I'm looking for in a candidate varies depending on where I am in my practice. And what I mean by that is I do make all of my students interview before I am willing to accept them for a second, third, or fourth year placement, and I am willing to turn them down. And so obviously what I'm looking for in a student position is going to be very different from a fourth year position. One of the big things I look at for a fourth year or as somebody to hire on, I really want to see diversity. I want to see a different undergraduate to graduate education experience. I want to see a variety of your rotations. I would really like to see a pediatric and an adult placement. I'd like to see an ENT and a private practice and maybe a school system and a hospital and an outpatient clinic. Now, we don't have that many rotations, but I want to see as many of those as I possibly can. If you're doing military, and then you come interview with me at a private practice, I'm going to look at that and be like, you have no experience whatsoever being in the outside world. Or if you only have private practice, and you're coming out and interviewing at a hospital-based system, I get a little leery about how well you're working with other people in a larger facility where there are politics and protocols that have to be determined that you don't necessarily get to set. So those are a couple of things I'm looking for. The other thing that I'm looking for is I'm looking at what your references tell me. So Dr. Branham brought up the references, and that was a great question to whomever asked that. But I'm really looking at some of those personality things because I know what fits my personality. And if I'm going to go to the time and the process to bring you into my practice or into the clinic when I was working on the clinic side, I want it to be long term. So those are kind of the few highlights that I see. And Dr. McGann Favor, maybe I'll throw it to you and then we can see if Dr. Branham's available to comment.
Sure, this is Dr. McGann Favor. So I would like to, I guess there's a few things that really stand out to me in a candidate, regardless of the experience level. So like Dr. Spohr said, your references will tell everything about you. A written, typically 1 page or less reference, it's very easy. I mean, once you've written a few yourself, it's very easy, or read a few, it's easy to see when a supervisor is over the moon, loved this extern, versus one that they just liked. So to me, it's really important that you choose references that really know you. And this may sound crazy, but I've had people put references more in a like list and contact information format rather than a written one. And when I called the references, one of the references said, "Oh gosh, I haven't worked with her in 15 years. Oh wow, I can't believe she put me as a reference." Well, we worked together for 6 months and she was good to work with, and so why on earth is this applicant putting someone that she worked with that long ago that didn't even know her that well? What does that tell me about where she's been more recently? In all honesty, when we hire, we want people to stay around, for their career. So if you're local, you're going to have a heads up on someone that's not local. So if you have ties to the community, then that's going to give you an advantage for me. And oh gosh, what else do I look for? Before I hire anyone, so we have an application process and an interview, but if I think you're the one that we want to hire, then I have you in person if possible, but if not, through a video conference, meet all of my staff. So you'll go around and meet our front office, our back office, our externs, our audiologists, our assistants, everyone. And I'm going to ask all of their opinion because we work as a big team and I want everyone else to be on board with this new person too. So I'm really looking for someone that can communicate and interact well with different personalities. So really just getting my team's input is a big one too, to seeing how someone may come on. I think that might be it.
This is Dr. Branham. So far I agree with Dr. Spohr and McGann Favor. I would like to touch on the location aspect. When I applied to my position initially out of grad school, I had seen in the job description that he was looking for someone who was, looking long term. And so I made sure to let him know that, listen, I grew up in the area. I grew up an hour away. I've lived at home this whole time in grad school, so I'm excited to move out. And the location here is perfect for me, is what I told him. I said, listen, I can head back home easily, but it's not so close that they pop in on me. So I just made sure that he knew it was a perfect location for me, that for me long term, this would be ideal, so that he really didn't have those worries. Outside of that, really I'm looking, obviously with the clinical aspect of it, I look at personalities as well. We have a team kind of environment in our office, and I've had students in the practice who sometimes came off as knowing a lot, and so we're not very open to either some constructive criticism or trying to guide them into a way that works in our practice best. So I'm looking for someone who's willing to be open, willing to do what's best for the practice. I'm looking for traits such as punctual, trustworthy, dependable, reliable. So I think between the three of us looking at the whole person. Obviously clinical is going to be a big aspect, but I need to know that if something comes up down the road, that we can sit down and talk about it and have great communication, and come to a resolution without somebody becoming very upset and causing tension in the office.
Thank you. That was a great answer by all of you, and I think very constructive for the listeners. So I'd really like to thank you, Dr. Branham, Dr. McGann-Favor, and Dr. Spohr for such an informative presentation. I'd really like to also thank all of the students that signed up and are on the line tonight. If you have additional questions, please send them to info@audiologist.org, and we will certainly forward those to the appropriate presenter or to the entire presenter team. If you have friends and colleagues that were unable to attend the webinar today, please let them know that the session has been recorded. We will send a link out to attendees after the recording is posted, and again, we anticipate that that will be done in the next 7 to 10 days. For more information about future SATA practice management webinars and to register, visit audiologist.org/students. We have 16 other webinars scheduled between now and August, and I'd like to also thank the SATA Board of Directors, and in particular Kate, for her efforts in getting all of those scheduled for students. There are 3 more posted right now that you can register for immediately, and the others have the time and date posted and will be available for registration soon. So with that, I'll thank you all again and wish everyone a great evening.